son is nonverbal autistic, and though I love him more than anything in the world, taking care of him is a tough challenge. When he turned 18, his mother and I had a massive argument. She wanted to send him to a home, but I couldn't stand the thought of him being mistreated, which I've heard happens often in those places. We argued for months until we had our final fight. She left, telling me that if I wanted to take care of him alone, then I could. I haven't seen her since. Even though I know I made the right decision, it hasn't been easy. More than anything, I wish my son could just tell me what he wants. Often, he has meltdowns, screaming and crying, and I would do anything to understand what he needs. About 6 months ago, he became obsessed with cooking. He kept repeating the word chef over and over. Maybe he picked it up from a show or YouTube, I'm not sure. Either way, I decided it was time to teach him how to cook. We started with eggs, but he got frustrated and began covering his ears, screaming. Next, we tried making banana bread, smoothies, and even pasta, but each time his reaction was the same. I was running out of ideas until one day, he handed me a note. It was a shopping list, and it confused me for several reasons. First, I didn't know he could write anything outside of his name, let alone a full shopping list in perfect cursive. Second, the ingredients were bizarre. Anchovies, sauerkraut, horseradish. But he was persistent, so I agreed. Even though it seemed like a waste of time and money, it made him happy, so why not? When we got home, he was ecstatic. He immediately ran to the kitchen and started mixing the ingredients. The look and smell were repulsive, but he carried on, happy as can be. When he finished, he covered the mixture with saran wrap and placed it in the fridge before going off to play Xbox. As odd as the whole experience was, I hadn't seen him smile that big since his mother was around. The next morning, I checked the fridge, ready to throw the mixture out. To my horror, it was empty. He had licked it clean and neatly placed it in the sink. I sternly told him he couldn't eat the things he makes because he could get sick. Surely enough, he had diarrhea for days after that. I tried to put the whole ordeal out of my mind until he came to me with another note a few days later. The ingredients were even worse. Raw beef, gummy bears, hot sauce, and more. I tried to refuse, but he persisted. I indulged him, but I planned to throw the mixture out immediately after he finished. As soon as he wrapped it and tried to place it in the fridge, I grabbed it from him. I told him we had to throw it away because it wasn't good to eat. He had an absolute meltdown, kicking, screaming, crying, and biting. It lasted over an hour before I finally got him calmed down in his room. After coming back upstairs and disposing of the putrid mess, I kept running the situation over in my mind. Most of all, I focused on the note. I hadn't thought to test him to make sure he was the one who wrote it. The next day, I had him sit down and try to write out a few basic words, but he could only write his name in block lettering. I dismissed him as my gut boiled with anger. Someone had given him this note, tricking him into making these recipes and eating them. I was going to find out who and make them pay. It was summer, so it wasn't someone at school. He never left the house without me, so it must have been someone in the neighborhood. I went out and bought a dozen security cameras. For 3 sleepless nights, I stared out at the tree line, trying to catch a glimpse of whoever was giving these notes to my son. On the 3rd night, I realized I'd been looking in the wrong place. Slowly, the lid to my septic tank slid off. Out of it emerged a man, covered from head to toe in thick, slimy muck. He crawled underneath my back porch, obscured by shadows. After a minute, he used a stick to push a note underneath my back mat. He then crawled back to the septic tank, knocking softly on my son's window before quickly jumping back in and sealing it. My son got up, went to the back porch and grabbed the note before returning to his room and placing it under his pillow. I was disgusted and shocked. I didn't know if the words exist in the English language to describe how I felt at that moment. When I regained my composure, I ran to my son's room, ripped off his pillow, and found the note. Looking at the window, I saw the brown streaks where the man had knocked. I ran, grabbed my shotgun, and went through the front door to sneak around the back. It was a hot summer night, and I felt sweat start to bead up on my skin almost immediately. For a moment, I wondered what the state law was for shooting someone hiding in your septic tank. In the next moment, I decided I didn't care and this sick person was going to pay. I crept over to the tank, my barrel focused on it the entire time. After flicking on my flashlight, I kicked off the lid, shining the light on the chunky scum layer. For a few moments, nothing happened until I saw a few bubbles rise to the surface. My finger was tightening around the trigger as the water exploded upward, covering me in that unholy filth. Before I knew it, the man had pushed me to the ground and was sprinting towards the tree line. As soon as I regained my balance, I unloaded every shot I had. Then, I reloaded and did it again. The cops arrived shortly after, given they received over a dozen calls of rapid-fire shotgun blasts in the middle of the night. I explained everything to them as they looked at me with incredulousness and disgust. More cars arrived with dogs, but they never found him. I'm not a wealthy man, but I spent every last dollar I had hooking up that house to the city sewer and paying a company to come with an excavator to rip that entire septic system out of my yard. I still get ill thinking of my son cooking up concoctions for that man to feast on his excrement. I tried my best to forget, to try and wipe it from my memory. That was until I found a package at my door containing $10,000 and a note saying, "For my little chef." The sight of the money and the note brought everything back, the horror of what had been happening right under my nose. The police never found the man, and there was no way to trace the package. It was clear that this nightmare was far from over. I installed more security cameras around the property and kept a closer eye on my son. He still had a passion for cooking, but I was much more vigilant about what he was making and where the ingredients were coming from. I never let him out of my sight for too long, always fearful that the man might return. The nights were the hardest. I barely slept, always listening for any sounds that might indicate the man was back. Every creak, every rustle outside sent my heart racing. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of my son being targeted. I knew I couldn't live like this forever, but I didn't know what else to do. The money from the package went untouched. I couldn't bring myself to use it, knowing where it came from and what it represented. It sat in a drawer, a constant reminder of the horrors we had endured. I thought about moving, about starting fresh somewhere far away, but the fear that the man might follow us kept me rooted in place. I felt trapped, unable to protect my son from a threat that could appear at any moment. Life became a series of small victories and constant vigilance. My son continued to cook, though I kept a much closer eye on the ingredients and made sure nothing strange was added to the mix. I tried to find ways to make him happy, to bring back the smile I had seen when he first started cooking, but it was hard. The shadow of what had happened hung over us, a constant reminder of the danger lurking just out of sight. Months passed, and there were no more notes, no more sightings of the man. Slowly, life began to return to a semblance of normalcy. The fear never fully went away, but I learned to live with it, to push it to the back of my mind and focus on the present. My son and I developed a new routine, one that involved more structured activities and less time for him to be alone. Despite everything, I held on to the hope that we could find peace. I knew it would never be the same as before, but I had to believe that we could move forward, that we could find a way to live without the constant fear. The memory of the man, the notes, and the horror of what had happened would always be with me. But I refused to let it define our lives. In the end, it was my love for my son that kept me going. He was my world, and I would do anything to protect him. No matter what came our way, I knew we would face it together, and that gave me the strength to keep moving forward, one day at a time. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more new stories.